here on location in Mexico City. You know, I don't transmit a bunch of foodie shots, and I do report on the news of the day, but a lot of my broadcasts sort of document my life and the things that I've investigated and the things that I have been present for and the places where the Lord has used me. And so this is one of those places, and I'm going to tell you a story that will blow your mind about this hotel, which you see is falling apart. The windows are busted out. The flags are faded. The bottom part is boarded up. It's like the Camelot Hotel in Tulsa, the home for the homeless. It's a disaster. It'll be torn down. But some very important things happen in this hotel. And so I'm going to tell you this story, and it's not easy for me to do, but in the name of Jesus, we're going to do that. And I would just want to remind everyone, there's going to be some noise. I was going to shoot this from inside the cafe. I did not know this place had been condemned and busted up, and that it was full of homeless people. So now we know. So be patient with the traffic, and the subway tunnels go right underneath of this. This is Insurgente's stop in Mexico City, and you could just look up the Hotel Segovia. I'll show you a quick 360 around where we are. It's another famous landmark hotel. I remember those stripes. There's the Attorney General's office, Ernestina Godoy, and they're doing a great job now. Mexico is on the rise. I just hope that the transformation will continue, that we'll get a new good president elected that's going to continue the work of bringing development and law and order to this great state and great nation. Right there's the subway going underneath. You see, this is the ventilation for the subway. And aside from that, this tunnel is a traffic tunnel that goes underneath of this glorieta, this central plaza, one of the big plazas and modern plazas of Mexico. You know, got skyscrapers all around. All right. People like to think that they can do whatever they want. In fact, somebody on the rancho recently told me, somebody who's hardened in sin, told me, yo puedo hacer lo que quiero en el solar mío. I can do whatever I want on my piece of land. Well, all right, you can't. Yeah, these lips are yours, the proverb says. But you will reap what you sow. And if people misbehave, then they're going to reap what they sow. So I'm going to tell you what happened with me in this building, the Hotel Segovia, in 2009. And this is how Mexico descended into a narco-state. Because after that point, it took a couple years for the narcos to totally take over, and then they were the law. In fact, I did not come back at the subway underneath. We'll just remember the good old days where I used to always broadcast in the coffee house, and we had to stop when they activate the blender. Please download these videos, because I'm blazing a trail. This is why I do this. It's not easy for me to brag. It's not easy. So pray for me as we do this broadcast. I'm going to give you a praise report just from today, by the way. I've been trying to get a hold of a Bible. There's a new Spanish Bible out. It's by the Trinitarian Bible Society. So you can Google that, Trinitarian Bible Society. And they've been in existence since like 1831, almost 200 years. What they do is translate from the Textus Receptus, 100% faithful to the Textus Receptus Bibles, into other languages, and they have a new one in Spanish that's a modern translation. No European tenses. You know how a lot of times if you quote the King James to an American or a Britisher, it's hard for them. Well, it's like they're hearing Shakespeare. It's not the way that people talk. And there's a correct way to speak without using antiquated tenses. It's 10 times worse in the Spanish-speaking world. And it's only very recently that we have Bibles that are at all accurate. But they have those European tenses. It's really hard for people out on the rancho that have, you know, a 4th grade reading level. And so this Trinitarian Bible Society Bible is out now, at least in the New Testament. And I've been wanting to get a hold of one. I finally got a hold of the guy here in Mexico City. And he said, we have a packet. There's 10 New Testaments, 3 books of John, some associated literature. And he said, if you can get out to my office, which is way the heck out by the new airport. I have to hire a car to get out there. If somebody wants to sow a seed, my Bibles, 5 boxes. So I get 50 of the brand new Spanish language, modern Spanish New Testaments. And I can start to, look it over and read that Bible. I've been trying to get this done for over a year. Finally nailed the guy down today. So if you're able to hit the PayPal button, give me some gas money to go get those Bibles. Listen, I'm going to step into a new place very soon. And right now is the opportunity for who's going to prove that they're with the program when it hurts. The Lord said that a gift is accounted to what one does not have. It's not reckoned according to what one has. When people have millions of dollars and it's nothing for them to shake loose of a couple grand, it's like giving pennies. What makes a gift of great value in the eyes of God is when we shake loose of our last dollar or something that hurts. And many times when I bring mission teams out, I tell them, hey, let's buy a guitar for this guy who's going to go worship the Lord in the ranchos. But we're going to have to fast our dinner. We're not going out to the restaurant. So you as a team decide. I want a unanimous vote whether we fast this meal to buy that instrument or whether we go pig out like fat Americans, and we don't do that. That's how I teach people. All right, so I got a call in 2009 from Mexico. Didn't happen at that time. My phone never rang. In fact, it doesn't ring now. But it really never rang with calls from outside of the country. Well, I got a call, and it was the lady pastor, Linda Cary. And she said, Sam, like I was supposed to know what was going on, right? She said, Sam, have you heard from Mexico? No, nobody calls me. Have you heard from Ernesto? No, nobody tells me. You better tell me what's going on. I could tell she was very bothered. And she said, Ernesto, the apostle, who had the largest non-Catholic church in all of Mexico at one time. She said, he ran off with my best friend. He ran off with my best friend. Cristal. I knew Cristal. I roofed Cristal's house. I roofed her house and her parents' house. It was really funny. You talk about giving your last dollar. I'm going to go ahead and just tell the facts. Because the Bible talks about those that went out from us and how they went out from us because they were not of us. And if they were of us, they would not have gone out from us. I was talking to the apostle about her husband before any of this BS happened. And he was this great big tall muscle man. I have a lot of respect for people that keep themselves physically in order and that spend a little time in the gym and that aren't just slovenly. And this guy did that, but at the same time, he was just always had a chip on his shoulder, always. So I was talking to him. His name's Lauren. So it was Lauren and Cristal. She was a lot younger than him. He was in his 30s and she was barely in her 20s when they got married. So I remember them being around the church. And she was just this Barbie doll, always kept her hair platinum blonde and was always done up nicely, kept her fingernails, had her nails and extensions. And so I went to do some work on their house, and they just squeezed her husband, Lauren. He just squeezed for every dollar. So I bid this job. I wasn't making anything on it because I wanted to help my friends, right? And once I got it opened up, I found that the last person that worked on this had really made a mess. And I said, listen, you got to buy 30 sheets of plywood. This will never be right. I cannot put it back the way it was. I said, you have to do it. Oh, this was so terrible for them. They didn't know what they were going to do. Oh, we don't have any money. We don't have any money. So finally, of course, it was me that bit the bullet, right? I did it for nothing. but they had to find that material money. I walked away from that job in debt like I did for years because there was a sickness, and it was centered in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where people's giving and receiving was all messed up. Anyway, I did the job, I finished it, I walked away. It's there today. And you know what happened right after that? Crystal went under the knife and got her boobs inflated. Shh. At which point, I'm just talking about my personal experience, like every woman I've ever known that got a boob job, you know, for cosmetic purposes, her ass got wider by the same amount. It's a mystery. So you see, when I was working on their house, they nickeled and dimed me because they didn't want to get into their boob job savings fund. The boob job savings fund. So when I came to this hotel, Crystal was up in the room in this dilapidated building. This is the only abandoned building around, by the way. And the real estate it's on is worth millions. You know, they'll probably tear that down and build a 30-story skyscraper in its footprint. All right, so I get a call from Mexico. It's 2009. And Linda, after asking me what I knew and what I didn't know, and I assured her I hadn't heard anything, and nobody called me and nobody talks to me, she said, Sam, Ernesto ran off with Crystal, my best friend that I wanted the Lord and discipled for years. He left me and my two sons that he basically raised and coached all their football and, you know, baseball teams and soccer teams. He left me and my two kids and 18 orphans that live in our home. He left us and he went with Crystal. Well, in 2009, I got on a plane immediately. I don't know how I did that because I was literally in the woods on my annual sabbatical where I do my January hunts. It's so cold and frozen, nobody's out there, and I literally would camp out in the woods in those times and just enjoy the solitude and my prayer time. Well, I got two calls. One was one of my good friends that died, and the other one was there's this doo-doo storm in Mexico. All right, so I got on a plane, flew to Mexico City, went to Linda's house, talked to her by day, looked her in the eyes. She was very hurt. She's still very hurt, even after all these years, 15 years later. So I said, Linda, where's Ernesto? And she said, he's in the Segovia with Crystal, living there, cohabitating in sin. By the way, adultery is illegal in Mexico, and even though this was the fourth time that Ernesto had done this, well, the fourth, Crystal was his fourth wife, and every wife he had abandoned in a foreign country when she didn't know what was going on. So he had a history of tiring with women. And this is someone who's a great pillar of the faith, all right? This is somebody who moved in the miraculous, who was tortured for the faith here in Mexico. In fact, that's how I met him, is right around the turn, 1999 into 2000. He was pastoring in Tulsa because he had fled Mexico. So his church that he established was the biggest non-Catholic church in all of Mexico. Of course, the government has always had unofficial ties with the Catholic Church that are very strong. And so they put him in prison under a false name, beat him and tortured him. They beat him with rubber hoses so that he would have blood in his feces, and his organs were damaged, but it didn't leave exterior marks. Yeah, it's the Inquisition all over again. This is part of how I learned who the enemy is, that it's the papacy. He was good friends with the Zirkles, and of course in Tulsa everybody knows Jerry Zirkle, but Jerry's brother was Jim Zirkle, and Jim had a huge missionary empresa, a big outfit in Guatemala. And Ernesto knew all these people because he had preached in some 75 countries. He was Morris Cerullo's right-hand man for any time, and there's a lot about Dr. Cary that I'm not going to get into in this episode, but I just want to establish that he was a giant of the faith. Anywhere that Morris Cerullo went, and we're talking when the movement was banging, in the 1970s, Morris Cerullo brought Dr. Cary, and he personally translated beside Morris Cerullo for all the mass miracle revivals in all Latin America, anywhere the people spoke Spanish. Dr. Cary, when I met him in the United States, you know what I said to him one time? He was talking about when he used to be a gangster and got shot and this and that. So after this, he invited me to his home where he and Linda had a little rented house in Tulsa and pastored a very small church. So we were sitting there in his cramped living room, and I looked at him and I spoke Spanish and I said, "Quiero ver los cicatrices." I want to see the scars. I wasn't gonna let anybody spin me a yarn about thug life and running drugs and running blow like they were Tom Cruise and Penelope, and not prove it. And he stood up, stepped back, took off his jacket, took off his shirt, showed me the bullet holes, undid his belt, pulled his pants down, showed me the more bullet holes. And then he said, "There are more, Sam, but I'd have to remove my underwear." I said, "Thank you, thank you." I don't just believe anybody. Would you? Would you? So he preached in probably 75 nations and had all those stamps in his passports. And when he was imprisoned by the Catholic Church in Mexico, it was only because he had all of those international contacts, including in the United States, that severe international pressure was put on the Mexican government. And he was released from prison under his assumed name that he had been held under and spirited out of the country. And he came to Tulsa, came to Broken Arrow, and pastored Jim Zirkle's church, because he had a big church there in Broken Arrow. Later, Eastman Curtis in the late 90s, after Jim Zirkle's death, bought the building and made it Destiny Church. And then, of course, a whole other big train wreck came up out of that. And that was the time that he abandoned his second wife in a foreign nation, her being from Mexico. He abandoned her in the United States. Yitza Cary was her name. And he married Linda. Now, I always wondered if all that was on the level, but something you need to know about the Pentecostal church is the Feast of Pentecost is with leaven. It's never been a holy and pure place, even though the miraculous is there. But let's just move forward to 2009. He and Linda have been married for 10 years. He raised her two kids from little bitty crumb crunchers into, almost grown men. In fact, her son Eric was killed by a drunk driver just before this at 18 years of age. Killed and buried in Mexico within 24 hours. All right. Linda Cary tells me that Ernesto is in this hotel cohabiting with Linda. In the end, he was unrepentant, wanted to defend this behavior. I'm going to wait for this subway. He eventually got legally divorced and legally married to Linda, like that made any difference. Made it not fornication. Years later, he called me because he was sitting at my brother's desk buying a car with Cristal. So he called me in 5 years after the fact. my brother called me on the phone and said, hey, guess who's here? Ernesto, Cary, and Cristal Cary are sitting here in front of my desk. And I said, put them on. So he puts them on the phone, and I immediately went to this issue. I addressed him as a fornicator. And he said, Sam, we're legally married. This is water under the bridge. And if you're not willing to accept that, I don't know how we can be friends. And I said, you and me and God only have one thing that we talk about until it's resolved to my satisfaction. And that is why you adulterously departed from your wife and left her with her 2 children and 18 orphans in Mexico. What nobody knows is that within this building, the Attorney General's office, this building here, are detailed computer records of every court case in the nation. And on record is an adultery case against Ernesto Cary, because another pastor turned him in and said this guy left his wife and ran off with another woman. And you know what the penalty is? It's a felony. 6 years. 6 years, hard time, prison for adultery. And that's why Ernesto Cary finally fled the nation of Mexico and died in the United States just a couple of years ago. Okay, so in 2009, I left from where I was at with Linda, checked myself into the cheapest hotel here, which is way too rich for my blood since I live in hammocks and stuff. Can't even get across town to get my free Bibles, right? I came over to this hotel. And I walked in. And I went up to the desk and I said in the best Spanish I could muster at that time, which was not that great. In fact, in this conversation, Ernesto berated my Spanish. I'm like, yeah, man, I've been with the gringos. I asked for Ernesto Cary. And they said, there is no one here by that name. And I said, listen, I know all of you, and you know me. I'm Brother Sam. I bring mission teams to Mexico. And when I bring them, our teams stay here. And you know what? When Ernesto Cary was megaballing and all of the super preachers from the faith movement from the USA would come to Mexico, all of their musicians and ministry teams and all their ladies in waiting would stay here at the Segovia, and all the fat cats would stay at the Sheraton across town, which was, you know, el alto de lujo. It was the height of luxury at the time. It's still there and it's still nice. I mean, there's newer skyscrapers that are the new cool thing here 30 and 40 years later. It's 50 years. A lot of that happened in the 70s. So I told them that at the desk of this hotel. I said, you know me, I know you, and we all know Ernesto Cary. And I said, I'm going to go into the cafe, which was right up against these windows, so you can see where it's boarded up on this side, and then these windows right here is where the cafe is. So I sat with my back right up against that window. I told the desk attendant, I said, please, whatever name you have him registered under, call Ernesto Cary and tell him that Brother Sam has come from the United States to speak with him. And I'm going to go have my coffee. So I sat with my back to that window where I could watch the elevator. Within 5 minutes, the elevator doors open, and he came out like this, strutting, had a tracksuit on like an Italian gangster, right? Unzipped to about here with some chest hair showing and his gold chain. said, "It's good to see you, Sam." Sat down at the table. Well, there wasn't a whole lot of chit-chat for I demanded he explain what the hell he was doing. I said, "You're here cohabitating with Crystal?" You know, finally, after having his Barbie doll for 10 years, Lauren kicked her to the curb. I thought that it would be a good opportunity for her to hang out with her mentors in Mexico. But the whole time that she was living in Dr. Cary's house, and remember, best friends with Linda, there was developing this secret romance. And it had become full-blown adultery right here. This is how spook houses come to be. It's because great and terrible sins are committed in them. And here I am, a young man. You know, it was not easy for me to confront somebody who I considered a mentor, absolutely an elder. You know, I preached in maybe 2-3 nations, and he had preached in 75, seen the miracles. This was somebody I really looked up to. And there are a lot of things that he taught me and directions of study that he led me down that I'm very grateful for. But why do you think the Apostle Paul said that when you restore a brother, be careful lest you be ensnared? You know, we're not supposed to come down with haughtiness and say, yeah, you got caught in this sin. How? You should know better than that. Well, the Bible tells us to be careful lest we be ensnared. And so we're going into the minefield. We are going into the swamp and the muck to help somebody out. And we have to do it carefully. Another thing that Paul said is that he, having won others, did not want to become a castaway. That is, depart from the faith. And this is also where we enter into reprobation. Those who have known the power of the world to come are candidates to be a reprobate. And that is a terrible, frightful thing. Kind of like what happened to King Saul, you know. King Saul knew the Lord's deliverance in his presence. Saul also prophesied many times. But in the end, you know, he did not respect the holy things. So I flatly confronted this man, my elder and my mentor, and somebody that I looked up to. And I very much felt like a child. But I did my duty and went to all that the Lord sent me. What the Lord told me, that did I speak. And I said, "You're out of line." And this man had watched me when my own marriage was on the rocks. He had watched me, and at that point I was absolutely believing God for my wife to straighten herself out, even though she had committed some of the same crimes as him. At that point, I was ready to forgive it. But regardless, you know, he saw how I conducted myself in the face of great betrayal. And in his case, he was the betrayer. He just decided, just like Lauren did before him, you know, 10 years, he was going to trade her in for a later model. Yeah. Okay, so I confronted him. And he defended himself. He leaned down on the table and he said, "Sam, I could tell you all the reasons, but I feel like I don't need to." And he just defended that it was okay for him to have run off with his wife's best friend and left her and her 2 kids and 18 orphans and run off with her best friend that she discipled. She still had her boob job. But you know what? That's why her previous husband kicked her to the curb, was because he was of the same spirit. In fact, I tried to get to this earlier and got distracted. I was talking about Lauren to Dr. Cary years before, and his name came up, and I just shook my head and I said, "An ass upon which man never sat." I never said that about anything. But what I was saying is, this guy's never come under your authority. You know, this guy's never come under tutelage, even, right? Which is something different. And you know what Dr. Cary said? He looked at me, you know, being a chess master, he looked at me and said, look who's talking. You know, he accused me of the same thing because I didn't believe in the pastoral headship thing. But I felt like I was a good soldier for him, under him, that I was a good younger to his elder. I felt like I was respectful of his instruction. And others, I mean, as long as they had the scars to back up their bullshit, right? And he did. And he did. All right. So he defended himself. And I shook the dust off my feet in this hotel. And I said, you're disfellowshipped. And we're not friends until you rectify this issue. I said, you need to go home to your wife. She's ready to forgive you. She had every right to kick him to the curb at that point. It wasn't her that turned him in for the adultery case either. It was another pastor. One of the many pastors was under them. 2 years later, I came back to Mexico and I met one of his co-pastors, a guy I really liked, Hermano Pepe, Pastor Pepe. He was a second or maybe third degree black belt in Shotokan karate, Japanese art. Very similar to where I started in Shoreiru. So I had a lot of respect for Pastor Pepe. I really liked him. You know, we were on the plane flying to Mexico City, myself and one other missionary. Narrowly escaped the nation with our lives because it was falling into the state of corruption. Because of this man. You know, this is what the Bible says about a root of bitterness in Hebrews, that lest entering in any root of bitterness, which is going after other gods or going after obvious sin, and many be defiled. And part of that is the reputation of the gospel. You know, the name of the Lord Jesus is blasphemed when people see how we misbehave and they're like, my God, I looked up to you and you did the most gross thing. I mean, my dog wouldn't do that. This is how people are defiled. But when it comes to the apostolic, he was the last great pillar of this nation. You know, do you know that he ran for his Mexican flag in the Olympics in this city in 1968? I asked him about it when I was down here with a mission team. I said, we were passing by the Aztec Stadium, and he said, this is the famous Aztec Stadium. He said it seats 70,000 people. And I said, is it true that you ran for your country and your flag in the Olympic Games in 1968 in that very stadium? And listen to the humility. Just like Saul. You know, the Bible says that there was a time that he was small in his own eyes. Ernesto Cary looked down and he shook his head and he said, yes, 70,000 people watched me lose. I didn't ask him if he won or lost. I asked him if he ran in the Olympic Games under the burning torch for his flag, hosted in his country. And he did. Ran in the games. 1968. The stadium was built for those Olympics. And when it was brand new, he ran in it. Yeah. When a person like that falls, forget about the skyscraper being dilapidated and about to fall in on itself. This is how the nation fell into being a kleptocracy. So I guess let's try not to do that, huh? Let's keep the faith to the end, whether we live or die. But that's the real story. I don't know who else will ever tell you. Nobody else was there. It's just him and me. Him in his freaking pimp suit, pimp tracksuit, his gold chain, his chest hair. He told me a short time before that, a couple years before, he said, I don't feel 60, Sam, but I do feel 40. He had one heck of a midlife crisis, but you know, even the uncircumcised from the Nephilic nations were invited to become proselytes to Israel. if they fled fornication, took up the sword for the Lord's armies, and were circumcised. Don't forget that in the book of Esther, when the fear of Mordecai fell on the nation, many of the nation became Jews. You know, there's all these smart alecks out there that want to talk about, well, what is a Jew? What is a Jew? You know, I've disfellowshipped people, a lot of people, for Jew hating. This is why I got into broadcasting, because in the conservative media, there's so many Jew haters. And they, what is a Jew? Is it a nation? Is it a line on the map? Well, I'm not going to explain all of that, but the Lord promised them from the great river, that is the Nile, to the river Euphrates. So it is lines on the map, and it's all of that. 1. 2. It's a nation of faith. The whole idea of Judah being the Jews is a bunch of bull. Because long before the tribes were ever separated, the book of Esther tells how the Jews, well, I guess they would have been separated. It says many of the people of the land became Jews. This is of the kingdom of Trans-Euphrates. Many of the people became Jews. So people are proselytes, both by blood when the men are circumcised, and by faith when they serve the living God. Anyway, let's keep the faith till the end. If you're in the United States of America, your nation is this close to falling into the kleptocracy that happened in Mexico. And everybody wants to point the finger at Mexico. They can't even control their borders. It's the fault of this Mexican American that fell the wagon. Ernesto, Cary. Oh, it happened right here. And only I have escaped to tell you. God bless everybody. Send me $1 if you can.